Hello my dear friends, and welcome back to another Star Wars video. So today we have some pretty major breaking news. We're going to talk about George Lucas, who opened up about his opinions on Disney Star Wars once again, and then we have some Star Wars movie updates. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I hope you enjoy my videos, and if you do, and you haven't yet subscribed, please consider doing so. We would be honored if you would join us. But no more jibber jabber, let's dive straight in. So if you're out of the loop, George Lucas, the maker of Star Wars himself, is preparing to open his Lucas Museum of Narrative Art, which has been 15 years in the making. And so this morning, the Wall Street Journal had an exclusive piece where they interviewed him, his closest collaborator, which is his wife, Melody Hobson, and they've given us some insight into what to expect, his opinions on cinema, the importance of preservation of visual art, and his philosophy. It's a beautiful article, and I recommend you go check it out. But we're just going to be focusing on the meat and potatoes. Even though it's been over 13 years since George Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney, apparently it took him a long time to get rid of the instinct to want to control Star Wars. And this is something that stayed with him for so many years. But now guys, in 2025, he says he's finally over it. He says, quote, "Disney took over it and they gave it their vision. That's what happens. Of course I've moved past it. I mean, I've got a life. I'm building a museum. A museum is harder than making movies." And this is something that to this day, some Star Wars fans find it really hard to wrap their heads around. George Lucas is still in the loop. He still talks with Dave Filoni, Jon Favreau, Kathleen Kennedy. He's invited to the sets. He was involved in Solo: A Star Wars Story. I'm sure he still helps Dave with certain ideas, maybe for Ahsoka. But in so many ways, he's over the franchise. He has said in a previous interview that the first 6 are his, but everything after it is a separate creative direction. So anyone hoping that George is ever going to come back to Lucasfilm, he isn't, and his words today are the final nail in the coffin. He's finally moved on. His version of what Star Wars is died with his movies, or remain with his movies I should say, and for all we know there was a grieving process where he had to just come to terms with that fact. This article says that he had to let go of that instinct, that Star Wars was still his, that he could come in and manage it. And even though he's moved on, he still loves what he created. No matter what Lucasfilm does now, those are still his characters, and he's always going to cherish episodes 1 to 6, arguably his greatest life work. But like George says, he's still got his own life. He's got these new projects, his museum is about to open, and I just hope one day I get to visit. The article also talks about some of George's creative decisions in his career, and one thing they picked up on, not just with this museum, but also to a large extent the prequel trilogy, is that George is, quote, "an approval committee of one." This is why a lot of people who didn't like the prequels back in the 2000s used to say, maybe George should have got in different directors, like he did for the original trilogy, with Kirshner and Marquand. Why didn't he get in different directors for episodes 1 to 3? Now originally he did proposition Robert Zemeckis, Steven Spielberg, and even Ron Howard, but they all convinced him to do the job himself. And that really played into George's love of managing his own properties. And here's another really cool tidbit. Lately George has been picking films for the 2 cozy but cutting-edge theatres on the museum's ground floor. One inaugural exhibit will feature the designs of Star Wars vehicles, and he says, "It's 1 gallery out of 33, and I did it grudgingly. I didn't want people to come to the museum and say, 'Where's the Star Wars?'" And he's aware that, to most people, the name George Lucas is inseparable from Star Wars, so you have to please the fans. And speaking of the prequel trilogy, they talk about the evolution of Star Wars design, how the prequel aesthetic broke the mold, how it moved away from the look of the universe in the original trilogy, in 4, 5, and 6. Banged up ships and malfunctioning droids helped the audience believe they were joining a gritty, galactic saga in progress. But George is an innovator. Whether it's the prequel trilogy or his plans for the sequel trilogy with the midichlorian stuff, he never wanted any 2 pieces of art to be the same. And that approach also applies movie to movie. And I fully believe, had George made his vision for 7, 8, and 9, it would be beyond our wildest imagination. He would have gone places we would never have expected. As Doug Chiang says, for the buildings and spaceships, George wanted a, quote, "sleek and chrome look." And so Doug Chiang and the team took inspiration from hood ornaments of antique cars. But the big headline, which I've already seen a lot of outlets run with, is the bit about Disney Star Wars. George has moved on. I just want to finish this news segment with another significant paragraph. This is where they go into, quote, the brain of George Lucas. When describing what it was like to have the ideas for Star Wars in his head back in the mid-70s, he describes the struggle that came with it. He says, "People can't understand what I'm talking about because they've never seen it before. That's why I had so many illustrators working for me. I relied on them to help people get the picture. And it's why he waited till the 90s to make the prequel trilogy, because the technology to bring to life what he imagined in his brain didn't exist yet." George is truly a visionary, and I hope with this museum opening in 2026, he gets love from the public that was sorely lacking only 20 years ago. But moving on, my friends, let's talk about Star Wars movies. So it's pretty easy to be down about Star Wars at the moment. It's been a pretty negative news cycle for about 2 weeks now. There's been backlash towards The Mandalorian and Grogu, and there were a few tidbits for Star Wars Starfighter, and that is the movie we're talking about today. The rumors going around stated that Rey Skywalker, is going to appear at the end of it. I shared my take in a separate video, and we spoke about it in depth, but it did cause quite a stir. Some fans who were originally very excited about the Shawn Levy movie was suddenly turned off, and I saw a bunch of social media reactions, YouTube comments, you name it, where people said that if Lucasfilm does this, the movie is DOA. It's dead on arrival, and they don't want anything to do with it. But today, we have an update which makes me think that the cast and crew heard about these complaints, because one of the main actresses who plays a villain in the movie, Goth, has addressed these rumors, and I'm inclined to think that maybe we jumped the gun, maybe they're not true, and maybe we're judging the movie too soon. In an interview with Elle magazine, Goth said this: "It's its own thing, with new characters, and it's a great script, a really great script. I'm being pushed in a way that I've never been pushed before." And she's not the only one, insisting and reassuring fans that Starfighter is a standalone. Shawn Levy emphasizes a very similar sentiment. They don't want you thinking Starfighter has anything to do with the Simon Kinberg trilogy, which is rumored to be episodes 10, 11 and 12. If you read between the lines, it's their way of saying this is not going to connect to the sequel trilogy or Rey. Now that isn't to say there won't be some kind of cameo, but if she's telling the truth, then it does mean all of the rumors and claims that this movie is just going to be bait, just a way for them to Trojan horse Rey back into the picture, could be mistaken. But what we have heard, and this is another big rumor, is Starfighter might be the beginning of another trilogy. How many times have we heard Lucasfilm say this? As always, it's going to depend on the box office. But to my mind, Goth's comments are pretty reassuring. And it does say something about the quality of the script, because she's on record saying she's not a fan of sci-fi, and her character is, quote, a different kind of villain. So I don't expect a Sith. Originally I theorized that maybe she's going to play a cultist, someone who rose from the ashes of the Sith Eternal cult, or maybe an Inquisitor of sorts. And also in the same interview, her character is described as, quote, a fiercely complex new character to the Star Wars galaxy. But if you just look at what's been announced officially, and you set aside some of the more unverified rumors, I honestly believe this movie is going to be absolutely insane. It's gonna slap. Another major Star Wars Starfighter update comes from Shawn Levy, who in an interview from a couple of months ago that went under the radar, teased something huge. He mentions how Stranger Things and Deadpool prepared him for his Star Wars project. And he says they prepared him to not spill the beans, to not reveal too much. But then he says this: his younger brother urged him to make a Star Wars movie about a very specific character which he loves. The rumors have said Kylo Ren. Now even though Kylo is long dead by this point, this is 5 years after Rise, I wonder if the villains might be former Knights of Ren. Could Ben Solo return as a Force ghost? I'm just trying to connect the dots.